The mysterious invitation. Jack had never seen a world quite like this one. The sky was a deep violet, and the twin suns hung low in the horizon, casting a strange orange glow on the land. He stood on the edge of a small alien village, the ground beneath his boots soft and spongy, like a sponge cake. He was on a mission to map out unknown planets, and this one was no exception. But there was something about this place that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. It felt different. The village was quiet. Too quiet. The buildings were unlike anything he had ever seen, with curved edges and glowing symbols carved into the walls. They weren't made of stone or metal, but something organic, as though the structures themselves were alive. Jack wasn't sure if he liked the feeling it gave him, but he pushed the thought aside. He had a job to do, and that meant talking to the locals, no matter how strange they seemed. As Jack walked through the village, his eyes scanned the surroundings. He noticed the people, if you could call them people, gliding silently through the streets. Their skin shimmered in shades of blue and green, and their eyes were huge, almost too big for their faces. They stared at him, but not in a hostile way, more like they were curious. He didn't speak their language, but their expressions told him they were at least somewhat interested in him. It was then that he saw her. A young woman, maybe no older than 20 Earth years, stood at the entrance of a small hut. Her skin was a pale shade of lavender, and her hair, long and dark, flowed around her like a curtain. She smiled at him, but there was something unsettling in her smile, something he couldn't quite put his finger on. It wasn't a friendly smile, but it wasn't menacing either. Just strange. "Come in," she said, her voice soft but clear. Jack paused for a moment. He wasn't sure what to make of her. Most aliens he had encountered weren't so direct. Her gaze locked onto his, and she didn't seem to blink, which only made him feel more uncomfortable. But he was a professional, trained to deal with situations like this. He nodded and walked toward her. "Thank you," he said, though his voice sounded unsure, even to himself. She stepped aside, motioning for him to enter. The inside of the hut was dimly lit, and the air smelled faintly of sweet flowers, mixed with something earthy. Jack's boots made no sound as he stepped onto the soft, moss-like floor. The walls were lined with intricate carvings and glowing symbols, just like the outside of the hut. He didn't recognize the symbols, but they felt important. "Sit," she said, pointing to a cushion on the floor. It was unlike any furniture Jack had ever seen, almost as if it had grown from the floor itself. He hesitated but took a seat. The alien girl sat across from him, her eyes never leaving his face. Jack couldn't help but feel as though he were being studied, analyzed even. But why? He was just an explorer, a simple man from Earth. "So, what brings you to our world?" she asked, her voice light, almost playful. Jack shifted uncomfortably. "I'm just here to map the planet, make contact with the locals, and gather information. Nothing special." Her eyes sparkled as she tilted her head. "You think it's nothing special to be here? You think it's nothing special to meet someone like me?" Jack felt his throat tighten. There was something in her tone, something subtle that made him feel like he was missing something. Something important. "I didn't mean it like that," he said quickly. I didn't expect to meet someone like you." She smiled again, and this time, there was no mistaking it. It was a smile of amusement, as if she knew something he didn't. "I'm Rena," she said. "And you are Jack, right? I've been watching you." Jack blinked. "Watching me?" His heart skipped a beat. "How did you?" "You're not the only one who has come to visit our world," Rena replied softly. "I see many things, Jack. I see things you can't even imagine." Her words hung in the air like a challenge, a question without an answer. Jack suddenly felt out of his depth. Why was she so confident? Why was she so calm when he was feeling more and more like he had stepped into something far bigger than he had anticipated? "I don't understand," Jack said, his voice quiet now. "What do you mean?" Rena didn't respond immediately. Instead, she stood up and walked toward the back of the hut. Jack followed her with his eyes, but there was something odd about the way she moved. Too smooth, like a dancer gliding across a stage. It wasn't natural, and that made him uneasy. When she reached the back, she turned and smiled again. "I can show you things, Jack. Things that will change everything you think you know about the universe. But first, you must trust me." Trust her. Jack had barely known her for more than a few minutes, and yet there was an undeniable pull to her words. Her gaze was intense, and for the first time since landing on this strange planet, Jack felt truly unsure of what to do. "Why should I trust you?" he asked. She smiled, and her eyes glittered in the dim light. "Because, Jack, I'm the only one who can help you survive what's coming." The words hung in the air like a challenge. What was she talking about? What could possibly be coming? Jack's mind raced as he looked around the hut, suddenly aware of how much of a stranger he was here. Was he already in danger? Unseen danger. Jack's mind raced as he sat in the alien hut, the strange girl's words lingering in the air like a heavy fog. "I'm the only one who can help you survive what's coming." Her voice echoed in his mind, and he couldn't shake the uneasy feeling crawling up his spine. What was she talking about? What could she possibly know about him or his mission that made her speak with such certainty? Rena stood near the back of the hut, her silhouette bathed in the soft, ethereal light filtering through the translucent walls. For a brief moment, Jack allowed himself to study her more carefully. Her long, dark hair cascaded down her back like a waterfall, and her skin shimmered softly in the glow. But it wasn't just her beauty that caught his attention. It was the way she seemed to move, almost inhumanly smooth, like she was part of the very fabric of this strange place. He couldn't quite put his finger on it, but something about her presence made him feel both drawn in and cautious. As Rena stepped closer, Jack's instincts screamed at him to be careful. He had dealt with many situations in his line of work, and one thing he had learned was that not all invitations were genuine. Sometimes they were traps. "Tell me, Jack," she said, her voice a whisper now, "do you believe in fate?" Jack blinked, thrown off by the sudden shift in conversation. "Fate," he repeated. "I don't know. I believe in what I can control." Rena smiled again, but this time there was something darker in her eyes. "You think you can control everything. But can you control what's beyond your understanding?" She stepped closer, her eyes never leaving his. "Can you control what you can't even see?" Jack stood up, feeling an urge to step back. There was something about her presence that was starting to feel suffocating, as though the room itself was shrinking. His hand instinctively reached for his communicator, but when his fingers brushed the device in his pocket, it was gone, completely vanished. He froze. His heart skipped a beat. The communicator had been there just a moment ago, but now it was as though it had never existed. I need to go," Jack said, his voice shaky despite his best efforts to remain calm. Rena's gaze sharpened. "You can't leave. Not yet. Not before you understand." Before he could respond, a low hum filled the air. Jack's eyes darted around the room, searching for the source of the sound. It wasn't a natural noise. It felt mechanical, like the building itself was reacting to something. The walls of the hut seemed to pulse, a faint, rhythmic vibration that made his chest tighten. The temperature in the room dropped, and Jack felt the hairs on his neck stand up as he realized that something was very wrong. Rena's smile didn't falter, but there was a new edge to her voice. "You're already too deep, Jack. Too deep to turn back now." Suddenly, the air around them shimmered, and Jack felt a strange pressure on his chest. He gasped, instinctively reaching for his throat, but there was no pain. Just a force, almost like invisible hands were pressing down on him. The pressure intensified, and Jack stumbled back, trying to regain his balance. His mind raced. Was this some kind of alien technology? Had Rena somehow trapped him with a weapon he couldn't even see? "Whoa! What is this?" Jack choked, trying to breathe. What are you doing to me?" Rena's expression softened, almost as though she were pitying him. "It's not what I'm doing to you, Jack. It's what you're doing to yourself. You're afraid, and that fear is making everything harder than it needs to be. You're trapped inside your own mind, and you can't even see it." Jack tried to steady himself, focusing on his breathing, but the pressure kept coming, squeezing tighter with every breath. I don't understand," he gasped. "You will," Rena said, her tone a mixture of calm and something darker. "This is just the beginning. The real test is what happens when you stop fighting, when you stop being afraid of things you don't understand." The pressure began to lift, and Jack stumbled to his knees, gasping for air as the invisible weight released its hold on him. His heart was pounding in his chest, his breath ragged. The room still felt strangely cold, but now he was acutely aware of how alone he was, how vulnerable. He looked up at Rena, who hadn't moved an inch during the entire ordeal. She was watching him with that same unreadable look in her eyes. "I need to go," Jack said again, his voice steadier now, but still laced with panic. "This, whatever this is, it's not okay." But Rena shook her head slowly, her eyes gleaming in the dim light. "You're not leaving yet, Jack. Not until you know the truth." He tried to stand, but his legs felt weak. Every muscle in his body was on edge, his senses screaming at him that something was terribly wrong. His hands were shaking, but he couldn't stop them. The strange pressure was still fresh in his mind, and his instincts told him that if he didn't get out now, he might never get another chance. But Rena had already anticipated his next move. She stepped forward, and in one fluid motion, she reached out and placed a hand on his shoulder. Jack stiffened at her touch, but there was something else in her grip, a strange warmth, like a pulse under her skin. And just like that, Jack found himself frozen. Not physically, but in his mind. It was as if a wall had been built around his thoughts, keeping him from moving, from thinking clearly. "I told you, Jack," she whispered, her voice soft but filled with undeniable power. "You're already too deep." His mind screamed for freedom, but it was as though his body had betrayed him. Jack's eyes flicked to the door. He could still try to run, but would he make it? And even if he did, what was waiting for him outside? Would it be any safer than what lay within the walls of this hut? Suddenly, the walls around him began to pulse again, and Jack could feel a low vibration rising in his chest. This time, it wasn't just the hut. The whole village felt alive, as if the ground beneath him was moving, shifting. He wasn't just trapped inside Rena's hut. He was trapped on this planet, in a world that seemed to have its own rules, its own dangerous rhythm. A rhythm Jack had yet to understand. His survival wasn't guaranteed anymore. Secrets in the shadows. Jack's heart pounded in his chest as the world around him continued to shift. He was no longer in control. Every instinct in him screamed to run, to fight back, but his body felt like a stranger to him. The walls of the hut seemed to breathe with him, and the dim light of the room flickered like an unreliable beacon. There was something deeply unnatural about this place, and about Rena. Her hand remained on his shoulder, her touch like an anchor, holding him in place, even though his mind fought against it. It was as if she had some kind of invisible power over him, one that he couldn't comprehend, couldn't even begin to understand. He was an explorer, a seasoned traveler across galaxies, yet here he was rendered helpless by an alien girl who appeared to be nothing more than an enigma wrapped in mystery. "What do you want from me?" Jack finally managed to whisper, his voice strained, as if it hurt to speak. Rena didn't answer immediately. Instead, she stepped back, allowing Jack to breathe freely again, though his body still felt stiff from the strange pressure she had placed on him moments before. The sense of disorientation didn't fade, though. It lingered in the air, like a fog that refused to lift. "Do you believe in destiny now, Jack?" Rena asked, her voice calm and unhurried. There was something almost hypnotic in the way she spoke, as if she knew the exact words that would make him question everything. Jack's eyes narrowed. "I don't know what you're talking about. This isn't right. You can't just. You think you're in control, don't you?" Rena interrupted, her gaze piercing through him. "You think you're the one making decisions, that you're the one choosing your fate. But the truth is, Jack, you were never in control. Not here. Not on this world. Not in this moment." Jack's chest tightened. She was speaking to him as if she knew every single thought in his mind, as if she could see right through him. He struggled to stand, but his legs were weak. His body seemed to be working against him, and his mind couldn't focus. The more he tried to resist, the more overwhelmed he felt. Rena's presence was like an oppressive weight, and every time he tried to push against it, it only seemed to grow heavier. "I don't know what you want from me, but I'm not going to sit here and listen to your riddles," Jack snapped, though his words felt hollow, as though he were trying to convince himself more than her. He tried to move toward the door, but his feet wouldn't obey. It was as if the very room itself was locking him in place. Rena's eyes softened, but only for a moment. Jack, you think I want something from you." Her voice dropped to a whisper, filled with an eerie tenderness. "No. What I want is for you to understand, to see what's coming before it's too late." Jack's breathing quickened. "What's coming? What do you mean?" His voice cracked, his fear slipping through the cracks of his bravado. Rena stepped closer again, her movements fluid, almost otherworldly. She moved like the air itself, bending and flowing with a grace that no human could match. Her eyes locked onto his, and for a brief moment, Jack felt as though time itself had frozen. "You've been sent here for a reason, Jack," she said slowly, each word carefully measured, as though she were placing each one on the scale of destiny itself. "You're here to change the future. But you're too blind to see it. The universe is not what you think it is. And this world—" She hesitated, her expression flickering for just a fraction of a second. "This world has a secret that only you can uncover." Jack's heart skipped a beat. "What secret?" Rena smiled, but this time, it wasn't the same smile he had seen before. It was a smile tinged with sadness, as though she knew the weight of the truth she was about to reveal, and she wasn't sure if he was ready to hear it. "You'll find out soon enough," she said cryptically, turning away from him and walking toward the back of the hut. As Jack's mind raced, trying to make sense of her words, a sudden sharp noise broke the stillness of the room. It was faint at first, like a distant rumble, but it quickly grew louder. A deep, resonating hum that vibrated through the very air. Jack's eyes darted toward the door. Something was happening outside. Rena's expression shifted to one of concern. "It's happening," she murmured, almost to herself. She turned back to Jack. "You're too late. It's already begun." "What's begun?" Jack demanded, his frustration boiling over. His fear was mixing with anger now. He wasn't sure what was going on, but he was done being kept in the dark. Rena's face hardened, and for the first time, Jack saw a flicker of something else in her eyes. Something dangerous. "The planet's fate is tied to yours, Jack. You can't escape it. Not now." Before he could respond, the door of the hut burst open with a deafening crash. Jack's eyes widened as a group of figures stepped inside. They weren't like Rena. These beings were taller, more imposing, their skin darker, their eyes glowing with an unsettling red hue. Their bodies were covered in dark, intricate armor, and they moved with an air of command, like warriors, like conquerors. Jack's blood ran cold as they advanced toward him, their presence filling the room with an undeniable sense of menace. "Rena," one of the armored figures spoke, his voice cold and mechanical, as though his words were being filtered through an ancient, unfeeling machine. "You've failed." Rena's face remained impassive, but Jack could see the tension in her body, the way her shoulders tightened. It was clear that these beings weren't just visitors. They were a threat. And judging by the way Rena reacted, they had the power to destroy everything she had built here. "I haven't failed," Rena replied, her voice steady but her eyes flickering with something else. "But you're too late. The Earthling is here, and the plan has already been set in motion." The armored figure took a step forward, his eyes never leaving Jack. "Then it's already too late for you." His hand moved to the hilt of a weapon at his side, a jagged, glowing blade that seemed to hum with dark energy. Jack's breath caught in his throat as he realized the severity of the situation. The people who had just entered weren't just alien warriors. They were enemies, and they had come for him, for Rena. And now, Jack was caught in the middle of something far bigger than he ever imagined. The fate of an entire world, and possibly more, rested on his shoulders, and he had no idea how he was supposed to survive it. The weight of destiny. The room felt colder now, the air thick with a sense of impending doom. The armored figures loomed before Jack, their dark eyes scanning him like predators analyzing their prey. He could feel the weight of their gaze pressing down on him, each second stretching out, building the tension to unbearable levels. Rena's expression had shifted entirely. The calm and mysterious girl who had once seemed so innocent now stood before him as a completely different person. She wasn't the same girl who had invited him into her hut with gentle curiosity. She was a warrior, a protector, someone who knew the stakes and had just opened the door to a much larger conflict. Jack's heart raced, but he refused to let fear control him. He couldn't afford to be scared now, not when he was this deep in the unknown, standing face to face with the fate of a world that had drawn him into its tangled web. "You should leave, Jack," Rena said quietly, her voice now low and full of urgency. "You don't want to be here when they decide your fate." Jack didn't respond immediately. His mind was a whirlwind of questions, each one more pressing than the last. Who were these armored beings? Why had Rena brought him here? What was so special about Earth that it had drawn the attention of these dangerous figures? The leader of the armored beings, a towering figure with a face completely obscured by his helmet, stepped forward. His voice, when it came, was like the sound of metal scraping against stone, cold, emotionless, and filled with authority. "You think you can stop us, Rena?" he asked, his tone disdainful. "You've played your games long enough. The time for your little experiments is over." Rena's eyes flashed with something Jack couldn't quite place. Defiance? Anger? Or was it something deeper, something personal? She didn't back down, though. In fact, she stood taller, almost as if she were gathering strength from within. "You don't understand, Zaran," she replied, her voice steady, but her gaze piercing. "The Earthling is the key to everything. Without him, your plans will fail." The leader, Zaran, let out a low, mocking laugh. "You think one human can change the course of this battle?" His voice was filled with arrogance. "You've underestimated us for far too long." Jack had heard enough. His mind was racing now, trying to piece together the fragments of this strange puzzle. He had been brought here for a reason. But what was it? He was no scientist, no soldier, just a traveler from Earth, a simple man who'd found himself in the wrong place at the wrong time. But there had to be something more to this. There had to be something about him that was worth all this danger. "Why me?" Jack demanded, his voice cutting through the tension. "What makes me so important? I'm just a man from Earth. What can I possibly do that you all can't?" Zaran's eyes flicked over to Rena, and Jack could see the flicker of uncertainty that passed between them. For a moment, it looked like Rena might speak, but instead, she remained silent, her hands clenched by her sides. The leader of the armored figures stepped forward, his dark energy radiating from him in waves. "You're not just any human," Zaran said, his voice like a death knell. "You're part of something much larger than you realize." Jack's confusion deepened. "What does that mean?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "It means," Zaran said slowly, as if savoring the moment, "that you've been chosen. Earth is not just a random planet in the galaxy. It holds the key to the galaxy's future, and you, Jack, are the key to unlocking that future. Rena's eyes darkened at Zaron's words, but she didn't argue. Jack felt the weight of his words settle around him like a thick fog. He was the key. But to what? To who? Before he could process any of it, Zaron made a sharp motion with his hand, and the other figures around him began to move, closing in. You'll come with us, Jack. There is no choice. The Earth's time is running out, and so is yours. Rena stepped forward, her eyes filled with warning. You don't understand, Zaron. It's too late for that. Jack has already started what you cannot stop. The words seemed to catch Zaron off guard, his expression faltering for just a moment. Then, without a word, he turned to the others, giving them a silent command. No, not yet, Rena said firmly, taking a step closer to Jack. If you want him, you'll have to get through me. Zaron paused, and Jack could feel the tension in the air. Rena's words were clear. She wasn't going to let them take him. And judging by the look on her face, Jack realized that her feelings toward him had evolved. She had seen something in him that made her willing to fight, to stand against these alien forces. He wasn't just a pawn to her anymore. He was part of something bigger, something that mattered. The armored figures stood still for a moment, sizing up Rena, and then, without another word, they backed off slightly. It was as if they were waiting for something, as if they knew Rena wasn't going to make it easy for them. Jack turned to her, his voice thick with emotion. What's happening? What do you mean? I've already started something. What's going to happen if they get me? Rena didn't answer immediately. Instead, she took a deep breath, as if preparing herself for what she was about to reveal. They'd want you, Jack, she said quietly, her voice almost a whisper. But you don't belong to them. You belong to Earth. You belong to the future. And whether you know it or not, your blood holds the key to something that will change everything. Jack was still trying to make sense of her words when the ground beneath him suddenly shook, the walls of the hut groaning in protest. The door slammed shut with a deafening thud, and the air became thick with static. The floor vibrated as though a great force was approaching, something massive, something unstoppable. A low hum filled the room, and Jack's heart raced as he looked around. It was as if the world was coming to life, shifting and changing in response to the power that was gathering outside. It was like nothing he had ever felt before, an energy that seemed to pulse with the heartbeat of the planet itself. Rena's face turned pale, and for the first time, Jack saw fear in her eyes. It's happening, she whispered, barely audible. What is? Jack asked, dread creeping into his voice. The truth, Rena said softly, her hand tightening on his arm. You are part of it. You can't escape it. And then, with a deafening roar, the walls of the hut shook as if the very earth was splitting apart. The revelation of power. The ground trembled beneath Jack's feet as the walls of the hut groaned and creaked with the force of whatever was approaching. He tried to steady himself, but the tremors sent him off balance. Rena's grip on his arm tightened as she pulled him away from the center of the room, her eyes scanning the walls, the windows, every inch of the space like she was searching for an escape or a hidden door. But there was nothing. They were trapped. Rena, what's happening? Jack demanded, his voice rising above the deafening hum in the air. What's going on outside? What do they want from me? Rena's face was pale, her brow furrowed with a mix of dread and urgency. You have to understand, Jack, she said quickly, pulling him toward the farthest corner of the hut. This isn't just about you anymore. It's bigger than us. You're part of something ancient, and they want to control it. Jack's mind was spinning. The words didn't make sense. He had come here thinking he was just another traveler, someone who had stumbled across a strange alien world by accident. Now he was hearing that he was part of something bigger, something ancient. What could a normal human like him possibly have to do with any of this? Before he could voice another question, the ground shook harder, and a loud mechanical sound filled the air, followed by the unmistakable sound of something large moving. Something very large. Jack's instincts screamed at him to run, but there was nowhere to go. The hut was small, isolated, and the walls seemed to be closing in around them. Whatever was coming, it was inevitable. A low, almost guttural voice boomed from outside, making the walls vibrate. It wasn't human, nor was it anything Jack had ever heard before. It was deep, primal, and powerful. "You cannot escape your fate, Earthling," the voice said, each word heavy with authority. "The time has come." Rena's face went rigid with fear, and for the first time, Jack saw her as something more than just a mysterious alien girl. He saw the fear in her eyes, the weight of responsibility that she had been carrying. This wasn't just a fight for survival. This was a battle for the future of the galaxy, and he, Jack, was at the center of it all. "We don't have much time," Rena said, her voice now steady but filled with urgency. "You're part of a lineage that goes back thousands of years. The blood in your veins, human blood, has powers that the galaxy has been waiting for." Jack stared at her, utterly confused. "My blood? Powers? What are you talking about?" Rena grabbed him by the shoulders, her eyes locked on his with intensity. "You are the key to unlocking a force that has been hidden away for centuries, Jack. A power that could either save the galaxy or destroy it. And those beings outside, they've come to take it, to use it for themselves." Jack's pulse quickened. This was no longer about strange alien creatures or technology. This was about something far darker, something much more dangerous. But what could he do? He was just a man. He didn't have any special abilities. No superpowers. Nothing that could fight back against whatever was coming. "Why me?" he asked again, his voice hoarse. "What makes me special?" Rena hesitated for a moment, as if weighing how much to reveal. Her eyes softened as she looked at him. "It's in your blood, Jack. Your ancestors, humans, were once part of a powerful ancient empire that spanned across galaxies. You were chosen, though you don't remember it. The power you carry is dormant, hidden deep within you. It's linked to the very core of your species, and it's the one thing that can either defeat the forces outside or destroy them." The weight of her words hit Jack like a ton of bricks. A human empire that spanned galaxies. Power hidden within his blood. None of it made sense. His mind raced as he tried to grasp at the impossible reality that was unfolding before him. Suddenly, the hut's door slammed open, and the armored beings from earlier stormed inside, their weapons raised and ready. The leader, Zaran, stepped forward with cold, calculating eyes, his helmet glinting in the dim light. "We have given you enough time, Rena," Zaran said, his voice carrying the unmistakable tone of finality. "Now the Earthling comes with us. His power will belong to us, and nothing will stop us from harnessing it." Rena stepped in front of Jack, her stance defensive, her eyes fierce. "You won't touch him," she said, her voice strong, unyielding. "Not while I'm standing here." Zaran didn't flinch. In fact, he seemed to revel in the confrontation. "You cannot protect him forever. He is our target, and you are the obstacle." Without warning, he raised his hand, and the air around them seemed to grow cold. A surge of energy rippled through the room, knocking Rena off her feet and sending Jack stumbling backward. He caught himself against the wall, breathless and shocked by the raw power that had just been unleashed. Rena struggled to stand, but her expression was fierce. "You'll regret this," she spat, her eyes blazing with defiance. Zaran took a step closer to Jack, his eyes narrowing. "You're nothing but a pawn, Earthling. You have no idea the power you hold, but you will learn. And when you do, you will be mine." Jack's heart pounded in his chest as he stood there, helpless. He had no idea what to do, what to say. He was caught in a battle between two forces far beyond his understanding. But he knew one thing for certain: he wasn't going to let them win. He had no idea what was coming next, but he was done being a pawn. "I'm not going with you," Jack said, his voice stronger now, filled with defiance. Zarin smirked, but before he could speak, a surge of light filled the room, blinding them both. The force of it knocked Zarin back, and Jack felt his body tremble with a strange energy he couldn't control. His veins seemed to burn with power, and for a split second, he felt something stir deep within him. Something ancient, something fierce. Reyna's eyes widened in shock. "It's happening," she whispered. "The power is awakening." Jack didn't know what was happening, but in that moment, he realized something crucial. He wasn't helpless anymore. He had the power to fight back, and he would do whatever it took to stop them. Unleashing the power within. The blinding light faded as quickly as it had appeared, leaving Jack gasping for air, his heart racing like it might leap from his chest. His body trembled with the sudden surge of energy, and his mind reeled, trying to process what had just happened. But everything felt different now. It wasn't just his body, it was his very soul. Something deep inside him had shifted, unlocked, and now he was no longer the same person who had walked into this alien world just days ago. Reyna staggered to her feet, her eyes wide with disbelief. Her breath came in short bursts as she looked at Jack, her face a mix of awe and concern. You felt it, didn't you?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Jack could barely respond. He didn't know what to say. All he could feel was the raw, unfathomable power coursing through his veins. His senses were heightened. He could hear the rustle of the leaves outside, feel the energy pulsing in the very ground beneath him. The air seemed to hum with life, and in his chest he felt a deep, resonating force, as if something ancient was awakening inside of him. "What is this? What's happening to me?" Jack finally managed to choke out, his voice barely audible. His gaze was locked on Reyna, as if she held the answers to everything that had been unfolding since he stepped into this alien world. Reyna's eyes flickered with a mix of sadness and fear. She took a step closer to him, her hand hesitating for a moment before resting on his arm. "It's happening, Jack," she said quietly. "The power that was dormant inside of you, it's awakening. It's not just any power. It's the power of your ancestors, a bloodline lost to time. You're connected to something much bigger than you ever realized." Jack shook his head, trying to make sense of it all. "But I'm just a regular guy. I'm not some ancient warrior or—" "You are," Reyna interrupted softly, her gaze never leaving his. "You are the last of your line, Jack. Your ancestors were once rulers of this galaxy. Their empire spanned worlds, and their power was unrivaled. And now, that power is yours to command." The words hung heavy in the air, and Jack could feel the weight of them pressing down on him. He had never asked for any of this. He didn't want to be a part of some lost empire, some ancient battle. He had just wanted to explore the universe, to experience new worlds, and maybe find some peace. But this was far beyond anything he had imagined. Before he could process her words, Zarin's voice echoed in the distance, cold and menacing. "You think you can control that power, Earthling?" he called, his voice seeping into the walls of the hut. "You have no idea what you're dealing with. That power belongs to us. We will take it from you, one way or another." Jack's heart skipped a beat. He could feel Zarin's presence growing closer, the dark energy that had followed him from the moment he arrived still lingering in the air. The leader of the armored aliens was persistent, and Jack knew that no matter how much power was awakening within him, the battle was far from over. Reyna's expression hardened, and she stepped in front of Jack, her body a shield between him and the door. "You can't let them have it, Jack," she said urgently. "Not now. You have to fight. You are the only one who can stop them." Jack's pulse quickened. He wanted to argue, to tell her he wasn't ready, that he didn't know how to control whatever was inside him. But the words didn't come. There was something deeper within him, a quiet voice whispering, urging him to trust himself. He clenched his fists, feeling the strange energy swirling in his body. For the first time, he didn't feel helpless. It wasn't a power he had chosen, but it was now a part of him. And if he was going to survive, if he was going to protect those he cared about, he had no choice but to embrace it. Suddenly, the door to the hut burst open with a deafening crash, sending splinters flying in all directions. Zaran and his soldiers stood in the doorway, their weapons raised, their eyes burning with intent. The room was thick with tension, and Jack could feel the electric charge in the air. Zaran's eyes narrowed as he looked at Jack, his lips curling into a sneer. "So the Earthling finally awakens," he said, his voice dripping with disdain. "But it won't matter. You are still nothing compared to the power I wield." Jack didn't know what to do. His thoughts were racing, his body trembling with the energy coursing through him. But as Zaran advanced, something snapped inside him. A voice, low and primal, urged him to act. He raised his hands instinctively, and before he could think, a wave of energy exploded outward from him. It was like nothing he had ever felt before, raw, untamed, and unstoppable. The force slammed into Zaran and his soldiers, knocking them back with a brutal force. The walls of the hut cracked and groaned under the pressure, and Jack could feel the power radiating off him like an uncontrollable storm. Rena stumbled backward, her eyes wide with shock. "Jack, you did it," she breathed, her voice barely a whisper. For a moment, Jack stood frozen, staring at the devastation he had caused. The air was thick with dust and smoke, and the remnants of the hut were collapsing around them. His body still hummed with the energy, and he could feel the power inside him. Unstable, raw, and frightening. Zaran slowly got to his feet, his armor battered but still intact. His expression was one of disbelief, but it quickly shifted to one of rage. "You think this is enough to stop me, Earthling?" he snarled. "You cannot even begin to comprehend the depths of my power." Jack didn't respond. He couldn't. His mind was still reeling, and his body was too overwhelmed by the surge of energy to think clearly. But he knew one thing. He couldn't let Zaran win. He had to finish this. He had to stop him before everything he cared about was destroyed. As Zaran lunged forward, Jack's hands flew up again. And this time, the energy erupted with even greater force. But this time, it was different. He could feel it. The energy was no longer just wild and uncontrolled. It was focused, purposeful. It was his. The blast of power collided with Zaran, sending the alien leader flying backward. The force was enough to send him crashing into the ground, and for a moment, there was silence. Jack stood there, panting, his body still crackling with energy. He couldn't believe what had just happened. He had done it. He had fought back. But the battle was far from over. The final stand. The dust in the air settled slowly, but the silence that followed felt heavy. The weight of what Jack had just done pressed on him, and he stood frozen for a moment, his breath coming in sharp bursts. He had barely grasped his new power, yet he had used it to stop Zaran and his soldiers. But the battle wasn't over. He could feel it in his bones. Zaran's shattered armor gleamed in the dim light as the alien leader slowly rose to his feet. His eyes burned with fury, a hatred that Jack could feel deep in his chest. The leader had underestimated him, perhaps even mocked him. But now, Jack knew the true depth of the threat they were facing. "You should have never crossed me, Earthling," Zaran growled, his voice low and venomous. He waved his hand, and a deep rumble shook the ground beneath them. The earth seemed to moan in response to his command, and Jack felt the weight of something ancient, something malicious, building around them. Rena, standing a few feet behind Jack, took a cautious step forward. "We can't let him unleash whatever power he's controlling," she said in a whisper, her voice shaking with both fear and determination. "You have to finish this. Jack, you're the only one who can stop him now." Jack nodded, barely able to speak. The surge of energy inside him was overwhelming, but it wasn't enough yet. He could feel the raw power of Zaran's forces gathering, and he knew if he didn't act quickly, everything he had fought for would be lost. The small, quiet voice inside him that had guided him up until now urged him to stand firm. Zeran raised his hand, and the air around them began to crackle with dark energy. "I will tear you apart, Earthling," he spat, his eyes glowing with malevolent light. "You think you can wield the power of your ancestors, but you are nothing compared to the might I command. This galaxy is mine to rule, and I will make you a part of my legacy." Jack clenched his fists, the energy inside him thrumming like a living thing. It wanted to escape. It wanted to destroy. But Jack was learning. He couldn't let the power control him. Not again. He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself, trying to focus. The voice inside him wasn't just an echo of his ancestors. It was a guide. It wasn't about destruction. It was about control. It was about balance. With a sudden motion, Jack thrust his hands forward. A pulse of pure energy shot out, faster and more focused than before. It collided with Zeran's dark energy, sending shockwaves through the air, shaking the ground beneath their feet. The forces clashed, causing a brilliant explosion of light and sound. Jack gritted his teeth, pushing all his willpower into the attack. His energy wasn't just raw power now. It was controlled, directed, a reflection of the will that had been passed down to him through generations. He could feel the connection to his ancestors, to the lost empire, guiding him, helping him focus. He was not just a vessel for their power. He was their legacy. Zeran screamed as the energy pushed against him, forcing him to the ground. His armor cracked under the strain, but he refused to give in. "You think this is enough?" he howled, his voice full of fury. "You are nothing. Your power is meaningless against me." Jack stepped forward, his heart steadying. "No, you're wrong." His voice was clear, unwavering. "The power isn't just about destruction. It's about protecting those you care about. You've lost that. I haven't." Zeran's eyes widened for a brief moment, before his expression twisted into something far darker. "Then you are a fool," he snarled. "You won't stop me. You will join me." With a furious roar, Zeran unleashed a torrent of dark energy, aiming it directly at Jack. The force was overwhelming, a wave of pure destruction that would obliterate anything in its path. Jack's eyes widened as the dark energy closed in on him, but he didn't flinch. Instead, he raised his hands, and the power inside him surged to life, stronger than ever before. The two forces collided with a cataclysmic explosion. The ground beneath them cracked, and the sky above seemed to tremble as the energy spiraled out of control. Jack felt his body strain against the immense power, but he didn't let go. He had learned control. He had learned the key to wielding this power. The dark energy from Zeran's attack was like a storm, wild, destructive, and impossible to tame. But Jack's energy was different. It was controlled. It was deliberate. It wasn't just a fight against Zeran. It was a battle for the future. A battle for the galaxy. Jack closed his eyes, focusing on the energy that flowed through him. He could feel it, the pulse of the galaxy itself, the heartbeat of the universe. He was not just a man anymore. He was part of something much bigger. With one final, decisive push, Jack released the power. It shot out like a beam of pure light, engulfing Zeran in its brilliance. The alien leader screamed, his form writhing as the light consumed him. He fought against it, but it was no use. The power was too much. It was too pure. And with that, Zeran's form collapsed to the ground, his energy finally dissipating into the air. The dark energy vanished with him, leaving only silence in its wake. Jack fell to his knees, exhausted, his body trembling from the effort. The power that had once overwhelmed him now felt like a distant echo, a force he had finally learned to harness. He looked up at Rena, who stood a few feet away, her eyes filled with awe and gratitude. "You did it," she whispered. "You really did it." Jack nodded slowly, still trying to catch his breath. "I didn't do it alone," he replied, his voice hoarse. "I had help. I couldn't have done it without my ancestors, without you." Rena stepped forward, her hand reaching for his. "You've saved us all, Jack. You've saved the galaxy." For the first time since he arrived on this strange world, Jack allowed himself to smile. It had been a long, hard journey, but he had made it. He had found his purpose. And now, with the power of his ancestors guiding him, he knew the galaxy would be safe. But deep inside, he knew this was just the beginning. There were other worlds, other threats, and other powers that lay hidden in the vastness of space. And Jack was ready to face whatever came next. The galaxy was his to protect, and he would stand strong, a beacon of hope in the dark.